Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into one of the most captivating and, frankly, terrifying unsolved mysteries in American history, the Zodiac Chronicles. We're going to break down the exact timeline, the psychological warfare, and how the investigation techniques evolved over the years. We really want to understand how a single shadowy figure paralyzed the public and just completely confounded generations of investigators. Let's get right into it. So, to really grasp the visceral reality of this era, you have to put yourself on a lonely California dirt road back in December 1968. Picture it. It's pitch black on Lake Herman Road. Stark, flashing police lights are cutting through the heavy darkness. You can practically feel that cold wind whipping against the crime scene tape. And somewhere out there, a mysterious, shadowy figure has just kicked off a living nightmare. One that would completely change the landscape of the California countryside and cast this incredibly tense, suspenseful mood over the entire nation. As we look at the timeline here, you can see the terror escalated with this terrifying, almost methodical rhythm, right? It all starts with that quiet night on Lake Herman Road in '68, where a young couple in a vintage car is ambushed by a man coming out of the darkness. Then, jump to early 1969, and the pattern repeats itself at the Blue Rock Springs parking area. Another vehicle, another unknown gunman, another burst of high-tension violence. But here's where things get really crazy. By mid-1969, the killer changes the rules. The vintage telephone at the Vallejo Police Dispatch Office rings. Nervous officers pick up, and this anonymous, chillingly calm voice literally reports his own murders. At this point, the killer isn't just acting in the shadows anymore. He is actively initiating contact with the authorities. And you know, that dispatch call? That was really just the opening move of a much larger psychological game. The battlefield shifted almost overnight from those remote moonlit roads straight to the busy desks of the Vallejo Times-Herald and the San Francisco Chronicle. Imagine being a journalist, just opening the day's mail, and suddenly you're staring at strange envelopes filled with shocking, cryptic symbols and coded messages. I mean, this is the exact moment the killer invited the press, and by extension, all of us, the public, into his dark narrative. He was no longer just a murderer. He was trying to be a mastermind demanding an audience. Right at the heart of this media manipulation was the infamous Zodiac cipher. These were incredibly complex, encrypted messages, filled with these strange floating symbols that were specifically designed just to taunt people. They threw detectives and codebreakers into this frantic, high-stakes race against time. So first came the 408-symbol cipher, which incredibly was cracked relatively quickly by a civilian couple. But then came the 340 cipher. This puzzle was so complex, it took a highly advanced international team of programmers over 50 years to finally decode it. 50 years! Suddenly, investigation boards weren't just covered with physical clues anymore, but with these bizarre, maddening codes. Tied directly into those ciphers was a visual identity that the killer meticulously put together. The crosshair symbol, that crossed circle emblem, became his chilling, absolute signature. Honestly, it was a totally unprecedented tactic for a serial killer at the time. He was creating a literal brand for himself. This emblem dominated frantic newspaper headlines and became globally synonymous with the terror of these crimes. You just knew whenever that cross circle showed up on a letter or was drawn at a crime scene, the Zodiac was claiming another piece of his terrifying puzzle. And the killer's brazen nature just kept growing, culminating in one of the most jarring events of the entire spree at Lake Berryessa. Picture this. It's a peaceful, daytime picnic at a quiet California lakeside. The atmosphere is totally calm. Then, out of nowhere, a mysterious figure steps out of the forest. But he's not just some shadow in the dark. He's actually wearing this bizarre, square executioner-style hood with his own crosshair symbol emblazoned right on the chest. The quiet, natural atmosphere is just violently shattered. This attack is absolutely crucial because it demonstrated a terrifying shift. The killer wasn't just operating under the cover of moonlight anymore. He was willing to strike in broad daylight, wearing a literal costume of his own symbol. Shortly after that, the entire geography of the terror shifted. The killer moved from the rural Californian countryside straight into the dense, affluent urban grid of San Francisco's Presidio Heights. It's a foggy night in October 1969. A vintage yellow taxi is idling under the streetlights, and there's a mysterious passenger sitting in the back seat. The sheer audacity here is wild, committing a brutal murder, the killing of cab driver Paul Stine, right in the middle of a highly populated city neighborhood. The killer essentially brought his reign of terror right to the very heart of the city. But the aftermath of Paul Stine's murder, that features what is easily the most agonizing moment in the entire history of the case. So according to reports, a police patrol car responding to the scene actually drove right past a man walking down a dark street away from the crime. The shadowy suspect literally just walked away, completely unnoticed in the mist. And why? Well, because of a fatal dispatch error. The suspect was mistakenly described over the radio as a black male instead of a white male. The officers drove right past the Zodiac. It perfectly captures the sheer, agonizing frustration of this case. It's just an incredibly haunting moment where justice was literally feet away before vanishing into the night. You could imagine the impact that massive missed opportunity had on the investigators. Pretty soon, detective rooms were just overwhelmed by these massive investigation boards. We're talking crime scene photographs, hand-drawn maps of Vallejo and San Francisco, chaotic newspaper clippings, old-school fingerprint cards, and of course those red strings desperately trying to connect disparate clues. They had multiple suspect files, most notably the prime suspect, Arthur Lee Allen. But listen to this. Despite mountains of circumstantial evidence pointing in Allen's direction, the red strings never firmly tied him, or anyone else for that matter, definitively to the crimes. The detectives were completely drowning in data, but totally starved for a definitive answer. A lot of the enduring fascination with this case really comes down to the stark contrast between the tactile, analog detective work of the 1960s, the flashlights, corkboards, and paper files, and today's modern forensics. Nowadays, we've got glowing DNA analysis screens, instantaneous digital fingerprint scans, pristine advanced laboratories, the whole shebang. Yet, there's a pretty tragic irony here. Even with all our technological evolution, the case remains an unsolved mystery. As we speak, highly advanced genetic genealogists are still out there trying to extract viable DNA from 50-year-old degraded stamps and envelopes. They are literally trying to solve the paper and string puzzles of 1969 with the technology of today. Which leaves us with a final, frankly haunting question. How does a killer step out of the shadows, completely terrorize a nation with complex ciphers and brutal daylight attacks, and then just vanish into the dense fog without a trace? Think about it. We've traced the escalation from quiet lakesides to the affluent streets of San Francisco. We've seen that totally unprecedented shift from physical violence to calculated psychological warfare. And yet, the dark silhouette of the unknown man walking away into the mist remains one of true crime's most confounding realities. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'm going to leave you to ponder that one until next time.